Hi, welcome to Beyond the Fundamentals. In this video, we're gonna show a clip from a video we did back on January 6th. And what I want to point out to you is this, that when the Synod of Dort came out, it is commonly misframed by Calvinists that the Synod of Dort resulted in Calvinism and its opposite back in the 1600s. But really it did not. It actually resulted in two different kinds of Calvinism. Synod of Dort is just a Calvinist squabble, and nothing from there ever left Calvinism. And you wound up with Arminian Calvinism and Bezan Calvinism. So watch this short clip and make sure you point this out to Calvinists. And the framing is too small, and we need to zoom out the framing. Make sure you point this out to Calvinists. Arminianism is not the opposite of Calvinism. It's a branch of Calvinism, and we need to understand this in order to properly define the problem. This is crucial. Thanks to Evan Johnson via email, who pointed this out to me and suggested that we do this as a separate short clip. So I appreciate that. Without further ado, as James White would say, let's get to the clip. Watch. I thought about doing a separate video of this, but what you need to understand about Calvinism, what people don't understand, is the Calvinism that we have today, the Tulip comes, the acronym, the Tulip, the 5 points of the Tulip, the acronym itself, Tulip, comes from a book in 1932 by Lorraine Bettner, okay? What that means is that before 1932, nobody is using, per se, the Tulip acronym. He kind of coined that in 1932 in his book. So you can go look at that when you get a chance. The 5 points into which Calvinism was summarized stemmed from the Synod of Dort, which went from 1618 to 1619. By that time, Calvin and Arminius were both dead. And I have a video called Arminius Was a Calvinist. Before you get all up in arms and start fussing about that, by the way, if you're a non-Calvinist, do not call yourself an Arminian. Do not call yourself a provisionist. Do not call yourself any kind of label like that, okay? If we do wind up with a label, it's better if our label comes from a procedural thing, such as like an inductive method practitioner, rather than a label that is associated with a set of conclusive propositional statements of belief, okay? Because we want to continue to stay in explore mode. We don't want to commit the same problem the Calvinists are committing by defending a set of fixed, stagnant, stale propositions. We are, God is a procedural God. He is not a stagnant pond. So we're not going to follow in that way. Also, the Calvinist paradigm tree, which shows how Arminianism is a branch of Calvinism, and we should regard it that way in Arminius' life. And you can go watch that video for more of this. Arminius was spent, he was embattled in all these controversies all his life. You know what he was doing? He was trying to prove the whole time that he was a good Calvinist. He's like, I'm following all the confessions. I have a quote in that video where he's saying, I recommend the readings of John Calvin up to and, just below Scripture. And if you read anything besides Scripture, read the stuff of John Calvin. He was constantly trying to defend himself as a Calvinist. And the most, staunch Calvinist of that era, Theodore Beza, he was presiding over the Synod of Dort, but he also appointed Arminius to all the positions that he went to. That staunch Calvinist, Arminius had Beza's approval and his recommendation, and to go and serve in the different places that he served. He and Beza were buds. They got along. Okay, it was a teacher-mentor kind of relationship. Arminius gets sick and dies. Okay, then later on you have the Synod of Dort that comes up. What you need to understand is that people think of Arminianism as being the opposite of Calvinism. It is not the opposite of Calvinism by any stretch of the imagination. It should be regarded as a variant of Calvinism. Right now, there are variants within Calvinism. There are people who call themselves like 4-point Calvinists and this kind of thing, and they all consider themselves Calvinists. You need to understand that historic Arminianism should be seen as a branch of Calvinism. Just as the Reformation should not be seen as this big, we should not venerate the Reformation as anything other than a Catholic squabble. We should not talk about the Synod of Dort of anything other than a Calvinist squabble. And the result of the Synod of Dort was not Calvinism and non-Calvinism. It is two different branches of Calvinism. You have Arminian Calvinism and Bezan Calvinism. Those are your two different branches of Calvinism. Let me tell you the common beliefs that they have. They both believed in total depravity. Okay? They both believe in total depravity. They both believe you had to have some kind of prevenient grace to overcome your total depravity so you could believe. That is a Calvinistic belief. That is not a biblical belief. They both made the mistake of starting with the human will. Well, you say, well, Arminius believed in free will. It doesn't matter. Starting with the will at all is a mistake. Do not do it. Do not start with the will. I hear people talking, I'm talking about non-Calvinists, good guys, people who believe the Bible. They'll make the mistake of trying to, go against Calvinism by promoting the concept of free will. Do not do that. The philosophical territory of the will is Manichaean, Gnostic, Augustinian, Calvinist territory. As soon as you go into that territory, our territory is Scripture. Their territory is the philosophical view of the human will. As soon as you go into that territory, that is where they dominate, because they dominate everything that is non-scriptural. Remember, Calvinism is clever post hoc rationalizations, clever philosophical reasons for why Scripture isn't true. So you have left off from scriptural authority, and now you're supporting this concept of free will. Now it's just a matter of time before they got you. So if you are a non-Calvinist, and you're teaching Sunday school to a bunch of kiddos, and you're trying to support the idea of free will, and you teach free will, and God gave us free will, you are preparing them to become Calvinists later. Do not teach free will. We do not need to teach free will. What we need to focus on is scriptural authority. That is it. Scriptural authority is where we operate. Clever philosophical post hoc rationalizations is where they operate, and if they get you in the arena of philosophy, it's just a matter of time. They spend a lot of time making up their clever post hoc rationalizations, and they're typically better at it than people who haven't been in and back out of Calvinism. So they will typically get you, and that is not good. So we do not mess with the will. We stick with scriptural authority. What else did they have in common? They both believed, Arminius and Bezan, believed that predestination includes conversion. They just disagreed on whether or not foreknowledge was involved. They both believed that election was about conversion, part of salvation. They just disagreed on whether or not foreknowledge was involved. And so if you were a non-Calvinist, you would understand Scripture presents election as a service thing, not a salvation thing. Well, Calvinism presents it as a salvation thing. So if you are following the Baptist faith and message that uses the word election in like as if it's synonymous with salvation, which is what the Baptist faith and message does, you are perpetuating Calvinism without intending to do so. I have a video. Now, you think I'm getting on to you guys. I have a video that I think is still up about chosen in Ephesians 1:4, where I refute Calvinism based on the bad premise that election is about salvation, because I didn't know any better yet. So I'm not telling you something that I haven't done too. I've made this mistake myself in the past. Actually, this guy right here helped me out a lot in that arena, the faith of God's elect. And now it helped me with the inductive method and to be able to see Scripture that, yes, wow, as a non-Calvinist, I was bringing this into Scripture without realizing it. And then he helped kind of scrub that away so that I could see Scripture more clearly, which is great. So if you get a chance to get that book, The Faith of God's Elect, get that book. I may read from it in a few minutes if I still have some time. So they both believed in so they both thought election was about conversion, salvation. And then, by the way, we have videos on 2 Thessalonians 2:13. If somebody God hath from the beginning chosen you to salvation. We have videos on that explain that. We have about 3 of them right now. So go check that out when you get a chance. They both taught some kind of prevenient grace was necessary to overcome total depravity. Calvinists just teach that theirs is irresistible, whereas Arminius didn't, but they still believe that prevenient grace comes from Calvinism. They both have the idea that the atonement saves. You hear this kind of stuff all the time, especially on the discussion forums with Calvinists. They talk about limited atonement as if, I think I just saw a quote from R.C. Sproul today, that, we believe in atonement. God isn't just trying to save people. It actually does save with certainty. Well, he framed things for certainty, and he's making the mistake of thinking the atonement is what saves. The atonement is not what saves. I'm going to show you some passages on that in a few minutes. And then they both believe in perseverance of the saints. Arminius simply believed that God foreknew and foresaw who would persevere and elected them, okay, for salvation, which that's not scriptural, that's Calvinistic. And they both believe that adoption occurs at conversion. And a lot of non-Calvinists today perpetuate that false idea, the idea that adoption occurs at conversion rather than where Scripture says it does in Romans 8:23, which is at the redemption of the body. So the main takeaway, you got to understand that from the Synod of Dort, if you are a non-Calvinist, do not think that the outcome of that was Calvinism and non-Calvinism. No, the outcome of that is two different branches of Calvinism, Arminian Calvinism and Bezan Calvinism. And we make the mistake, and because we think we're in non-Calvinist territory, we wind up promoting what I've called Calvinism light in the past. It's not quite as strong as Bezan Calvinism, but it's still very Calvinistically premised and still outside of Scripture. And we non-Calvinists historically have perpetuated that. Then that lingo and that language surrounds the way we think, talk, and operate, even in non-Calvinism land. And so that's why it's so important to pay attention epistemically and go back to first principles thinking and question all these phrases that we're so comfortable with and double check and see whether they are scriptural or not. And you'll find out a lot of the times they aren't. There aren't. There's so many things that aren't scriptural that we think are scriptural that we just keep perpetuating.